The most common question we are asked is, when is the best time to visit Nepal? In this video, we'll try and give you the answer. But the right answer depends on 4 factors: what activity you have in mind, what season you plan to visit, how high you plan to go, and where you plan to go. There are 4 main activities people visit Nepal for: mountain climbing, trekking, cultural tours of many types, and wildlife tours. But mountain climbing is a special case, and every mountain has its own unique characteristics and local climate. So we can't really generalise for climbing. Just contact us directly at Langtang Re Trekking and Expedition if you want information for planning a climbing expedition. So this video will focus on the other more common activities. But first, you need to think about where Nepal is located and what that means for Nepal's climate and seasons. Because Nepal sits just north of India, it experiences the same seasonal patterns as India, in particular the midsummer monsoon. But we'll come back to the monsoon in a moment. The other important factor is Nepal's location on the southern face of the massive Himalaya range. So all of northern Nepal is very high mountain peaks and valleys. But the capital, Kathmandu, sits at a very modest 1,400 metres or just 4,600 feet altitude. While the northern peaks of the Himalayas reach well over 7,000 and 8,000 metres, and the valleys where treks are conducted often reach altitudes of 4,000 or 5,400 metres, these altitudes have a huge influence on the temperatures and ability to trek safely. The 2 most common regions for trekking are the valleys leading to Mount Everest and its base camp, and the Annapurna region, particularly its southern approaches and the base camp area. So, if you plan to trek to Everest or Annapurna, you already know the planned location, but you need to understand the implications of altitude and seasons. The most common Everest trek is from Lukla to Everest Base Camp. It'll take you about a week to reach base camp and a bit less to return to Lukla. You'll start at 2,800 metres or about 9,000 foot altitude and reach over 5,300 metres or 17,400 feet at base camp. That is very, very high. The air is thin and it gets colder as you go higher. You'll be walking on a frozen glacier as you approach base camp, so it gets cold up there. So you need to find the best time of year to avoid the bitter cold and snows. These charts show the seasonal change in temperature and rainfall for Kathmandu in degrees centigrade and millimetres of rainfall, or in inches if you prefer. So even in Kathmandu, which is not at a high altitude, it gets down to freezing in winter and a bit hot in summer. But it is also the rain you need to plan for, particularly the midsummer monsoon that sweeps across India and crashes into the Himalayan mountains. So if you plan to trek the high valleys and mountains, best to avoid the dangerous cold and snows of midwinter. And the monsoon from June through August tends to be very wet, cloudy and stormy, so not the most comfortable time to trek to Everest. While the altitudes reached on Annapurna treks are not quite as high as for Everest, their trekking conditions are similar. Probably best to plan your visit for spring or autumn. While it can be cold in February and November, these are still good times to trek in the mountains if you have the right clothing, equipment, accommodation planned, and a good guide with you. But while you might be best not to trek to Everest or Annapurna Base Camp during the monsoon, there are places where you can trek during the monsoon very comfortably. The Upper Mustang region can be safely and comfortably trekked any time apart from midwinter. And the Annapurna circuit can also be trekked during the monsoon, but best avoided midwinter. The main Annapurna mountain range is very high and blocks the northward movement of the monsoon clouds and storms. This forms a rain shadow region north of the mountain range. This reduces the rain and makes trekking possible. The Upper Mustang Trek reaches almost to the border with Tibet, and the Annapurna Circuit Trek will take you through the rain shadow region north of the high ranges. So these treks can be conducted any month apart from midwinter. If you want to visit villages and valleys in the lower foothills and experience the life, festivals, religion and music of Nepali people, you have a bit more flexibility as the altitudes will not be so high. All of the main farming villages are located below 3,000 metres altitude and usually much less. That is where the people are, so that's where you'll find Nepali culture. So for cultural tours, just avoid the depth of winter. If you don't mind a bit of rain, you can even visit during the monsoon, but most people plan around spring and autumn. There are a range of wildlife tour options, some that head high into the mountains, but there are other options at lower altitude too. The Chitwan National Park is located on the southern plains of Nepal, where the altitude is very low, just 200 metres. But here you can find tiger, elephant, rhinoceros, crocodile, antelope, and an abundance of mammals and birds. Given the low altitude, there's not much risk of snow, so you can plan your visit for any time of the year. Even the monsoon is a great time for wildlife spotting. So, almost any time is a great time to visit Nepal. It just depends on what you want to do and where you want to go. If you need help to plan your visit, please contact Pampa. She has the answers to all your questions. We hope to see you soon at Langtangri Trekking and Expedition.